We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that we really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisade's Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. Joining me today is Rudy Havenstein, senior market commentator and Reichbank president from 1908 to 1923. How are you today, Rudy?
I'm doing good, except people have reminded me today that it's been 100 years since I died, but I told them that's fake news.
Well, I'm sure we'll get into the idea of fake news and all sorts of stuff.
Anything you want.
Today here. But your Twitter really serves as a time capsule of sorts to remember and really to document the happenings of what's going on in the world of finance. So why is it that you make, let's say, a parody account of the president of the Reichbank? And is it because of the parallels to our time in history right now?
I think it's like April of 2013, or March or April 2013. So I'd always liked that period of history around World War I and post-World War I, before World War II, for some reason. And I don't know. I just decided one day, I should go on. And I think I wanted to go on, like I told people, that's why I did emails, years ago, starting in the 90s or something, to friends, that things I take for granted about the markets and stuff people don't know about. Smart people would have, but they're too busy running their business or working or going to school or whatever to pay attention, and they don't know these things. So I just trying to do an informative account centered on finance. And I think at the time, because this was a problem for 10 years until 21, 22, I was so tired of hearing every day, somebody on CNBC or in the Financial Times or Bloomberg say, we have no inflation and we need higher inflation. And I don't know if people forget, but for 10 years, they were saying that. And the official inflation rate was, 1%, 1.5, 0.5. And every time I heard someone say that, I was like, are you out of your mind? I look at my checkbook and so anyway, that was a thing in my mind. Like, I got to teach people about inflation. Inflation and cost of living, or CPI and cost of living, are two totally different things, in my opinion. So anyway, I thought, well, who's a good representative of that? And, he's got a cool avatar and, great mustache. And I think, in all seriousness, that the profligacy or the mismanagement of the Reichsbank directly led to Hitler. I mean, sometimes I get into it with people say, no, it was the Great Depression. Well, Hitler's push was in 1923 at the height of the inflation. So he didn't succeed that time, but he succeeded 10 years later in getting in power. So it was sort of clearly a half funny account, but it's also a half serious account. I sometimes tell people my jokes, I don't joke. They're all serious. And a lot of my jokes are, because I think inflation is horrific for most people. And I think it's downplayed and mocked by the types of people in the top few percent that we see every day on CNBC or at the staffers at the Federal Reserve, or the Minneapolis Fed, which has a few wonderful ones. So anyway, it was Rudy Havenstein seemed like a good guy to use as a, face, because I didn't want to expose, my family or anything to any attention from, people that maybe disagreed with me. I also been very anti-war and anti-Saudi and things like that over the years. And, so in my pinned tweet, I always point people to, but anyway, that's why I started doing this, is to educate people, have some fun. But in the background, there's I really view, fiat money as a bad thing over time. I mean, how do they all end up, historically? So it's try to get people to wake up. There's no free lunch. And this generation is, I've done well, but this generation is like a bunch of grandparents that take the whole family out to dinner and then they skip out on the bill. That's how I view it. So I think Thomas Paine said, if there be trouble, let it be in my time, so my kids can have peace. And that's how I feel. And I don't think this generation, by and large, cares about the kids. And that bothers me. So anyway, on a cheerful note.
Well, as you put it there, it's a really interesting time in history to study that time, as you said, the rise of Hitler, and really those periods in history that create these divisive figures, but also this polarization between two sides. And I don't think that has ever really been more at the forefront, where people are so polarized as they are right now, or, maybe becoming to be, or whether you think, let's say, that is getting worse or getting better. But it just seems like telling the truth right now is such a revolutionary act, right?
Yeah, somebody said that. I remember the 60s and the Vietnam War. People were pretty polarized then. I think that the big difference now, it seems, and I don't know why, but I mean, I've always been able to argue with people on something and then go have a beer. And I think so many people have lost that capacity, it seems, especially online. You see the worst. But it's like people have a litmus test of here's 50 issues. And if you deviate from, if you disagree with them on any one of those issues, then you're just like, you're a Nazi or a racist or a Hitler or something. And I'm like, that's just crazy. I mean, there's no litmus test. I have people on follow me that are very far left, I think, and also very far right and in the middle, which I think is what I am. I'm a pretty moderate guy, lean libertarian, but I'm not a capital L libertarian. I just believe that, people should pretty much be left alone, unless they're harming other people. So I don't know. I think people need to be able to disagree without losing their minds. And everybody always just, some things aren't worth fighting over.
Almost.
They take it personally. Here's the thing. I stopped watching cable news right after Trump was elected because it went from bad to just insane. Russia. And I just decided, you know what? All they're doing is pushing your buttons. I tell those people the best advice to stop cable news because whether you're watching Fox or you're watching MSNBC, all they want to do is get you amped up, Mm-hmm. And same thing with the clickbait, the BuzzFeeds and the Vice and all these others, they'll have some headline like, Trump eats babies or something, and then the people who hate Trump will click on that because they're like, yeah, he eats babies. And then the people who are pro-Trump will be outraged. He does not eat babies. There is no proof that he, so it doesn't matter left, right. They get you all worked up and they don't care whether your click is a rage click or a happy click, So anyway, I try not to get caught up with that kind of nonsense. Sometimes I do when I see something just over the top. It almost seems like it's planned. I mean, I put out a tweet the other day that said something like, if you wanted a one world government, the best way to do it might be to just try to destroy the one country in the world that might stand up against that, the United States, Mm-hmm. So it seems like it's planned sometimes. I mean, sometimes I look at this Biden administration and it's like they pick the worst possible people for every position. And that's not partisan. I think the same with the Trump administration. He brings in Mnuchin and Cohn and Bolton and, so that's another thing. I'm not bipartisan. I don't like either party at all. But anyway, back to the thing. I have people that, will argue with them. And some people, the minute they know you disagree with them, they'll, I got called some names the other day. And I just said, all right. I mean, I know I can't, but I have other people that go, well, you know what? You're wrong on this. And I'll say, well, maybe you're right. But this is how I think. And then we're like, I've had people say, oh, okay, well, all right. Well, it's good to talk to someone who doesn't, immediately block me or something. Mm-hmm. And I feel the same way. I mean, I'm willing to have conversations with people and it doesn't bother me that you disagree with me,
I think the value in that is having a conversation, really understanding the nuance of why you hold that position, right?
Yeah, nuance is something that's very in low supply nowadays, Yeah, and so I have friends that I disagree with, and we can argue pretty vehemently, and then it's like, oh well, I'll see you tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want another beer? But I have friends that on the left and right that they lost their minds after Trump was elected or because of COVID. Both extremes, and they stopped being friends. And that's kind of sad to see. I'm kind of like Switzerland. I could be friends with people who are Biden supporters or Trump supporters. Or, Ron Paul supporters, I can be friends with everybody, but a lot of people aren't like that nowadays. And I think that's sad. So
totally agree. And I think that's something that we lose with online discourse and, having these long form conversations is, I think, an attempt to be able to reconcile a little bit of that because we need to, regain that understanding of the people on the other side of the fence are just like you and I, and they just want to be heard. And I'm sure we can find a lot of common ground with many of these people if we just sat down and had, a conversation. But instead, we just have this, it's the case of Twitter. We have this small amount of characters to be able to have a conversation back and forth. And that removes the personality from that equation. And it's really unfortunate. But, I think it kind of brings up the point also that mainstream media and then this clickbait media is really complicit in stirring outrage, as you put in that example, whether it's good or bad. But do you think that they're really, complicit in carrying this message? And does the average person have much more of an opportunity and really a responsibility now more than ever to educate themselves and others about the reality of the financial situation that we're in right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's already been shown in studies and stuff that like Facebook in particular, which I find unusable. But they develop algorithms designed to just drive people insane. It's, there've been studies about young girls and their self-esteem and all that, and how Facebook just like feeds the worst of that, And so I think a lot of it is intentional. God knows about on Twitter with the algos for what things you see and don't see. As far as knowing the truth about what's going on, I've been doing this for decades, trying to just tell people what's going on in financial markets, whether it's on Substack or Twitter or in my emails to friends and stuff. But I've actually had people tell me before, I don't want to know. I'll say something. I'll say, did you know that? I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Also, I don't care. I don't care. A common one you get on FinTwit is, hey, yeah, I know this is corrupt and bad, but I'm making money. Okay, I understand that. I mean, I try and make money too, but there's a lot of that. And like I said, the idea that you care about society as a whole, and rather than just your own nihilism is discouraging sometimes. But you know what? The other thing I always say is, there's so many good people out there. I mean, someone said one time to me, why are people so bad or something like that? And I'm like, maybe after some horrible thing that happened. I said, no, the better question is, why are so many people so good? We have a lot of wonderful people, and they don't tend to get on the news or be highlighted on Twitter or in Substacks or whatever. And, I'm as guilty as anybody. I prefer, I got a kind of a sarcastic way of looking at things, or not cynical, but I'm not a cynic. I'm a skeptic because I still have hope. But, I concentrate on the things that bug me, and instead of maybe I could just have an account where all I did was just highlight things that I think are wonderful, and that might be a better way to go. But I am concerned about this country and where it's gone. And I grew up very middle class. And so I have an affinity. That's where my loyalties lie. I told someone the other day. So, and the middle class is just going to hell in a handbasket, as the old saying goes. And the Larry Finks and the Steve Schwarzman are just doing great. And it's been a trend for decades, and it's not changing. And I think it's bad for the country and shades of ancient Rome, and it bugs me. And I don't like that. I also don't like how our military has been. Look at all the wars just in my lifetime, from Vietnam. And of course, we don't declare them anymore. We don't follow the Constitution anymore. We just kind of argue over who to bomb next. So the purpose of this account was to inform people more than anything else about what's going on. And I think a lot of people do want to be informed. And the ones who don't, there's nothing, don't waste time on them. So it's just like anything in life. You're trying to help somebody. If they don't want help, just move on to someone who does want help. So
you brought up Janet Yellen earlier. Kind of maybe strikes me as a person that would be in an echo chamber of sorts. Do you think that she really believes her previous stance on inflation, or does she just have no idea?
I think she's in a cult just as much as anybody at Jonestown's in a cult. She's in a complete bubble. She's worth tens of millions from being a Berkeley econ teacher, basically, she's been at the Fed off and on since 1977. Now she's Treasury Secretary, which is just completely absurd in my mind. And I think she's done great damage to this country. She was part of the housing bubble, thing last time, and she's part of the housing bubble thing this time. And she leaves the Fed and then makes $7 million in 2 years, giving speeches, and Zoom calls to Citadel and Citigroup and people other banks that she should have regulated but didn't. And it's corruption at the top level. And I've talked about this a lot lately. Accountability. There's no accountability. There's no accountability. Why is Janet Yellen Treasury Secretary with her record? Why did Ben Bernanke have is with his record? And the funny thing is that if I say that, I've been saying this for forever, for 10 years. But when I first started saying it, I'd get people like, oh my God, how dare I said something about Larry Summers one time, like 10 years ago. And I had some angry economist come at me. How dare you impugn, Larry Summers? And I was like, well, he's palling around with Jeff Epstein. I should impugn him. And it's, there's so many Janet Yellen stands out there. It's, that her fans. And same thing with Bernanke. Bernanke has fans. Hell, they got guys like, I forget, Bloomberg's full of them. These guys that just love the central bankers. Never seen reporters more obsequious and subservient and useless than when they're talking to a Fed official. They just that's another thing. And then we've got Hilsenrath writing a book called Yellen, which he described as a love story. You've got Timar, who wrote a book about what a hero Powell's Fed was during COVID. You've got, what's her name, Jenna Smialek I think she's at the Times, who wrote a book about, I don't know, how our central bankers are just, testing the limits of what can be done, and I'm like, God, that's the problem. Done for who, And so, and you look, and I repeatedly say this, and nobody cares. Nobody, Nobody cares. Why is Steve Leisman always, why don't you have Jim Grant at the press conferences to interview Powell or to question Powell? Why don't you have, Steve Keen or have Michael Hudson or have Jeff Snyder or Jeremy Grantham, or Edward Jasler or someone like that? It's someone who knows something about the Fed, not these people that like, yeah, do you, how's QT going? And then he won't answer, he doesn't. It's absurd. Financial media is abysmal, as we've seen from the FTX saga, where CNBC was basically an infomercial for Sam Bankman-Fried. But there's no consequences. Then you've got CNBC anchors that are hosting specials on the trial of, SBF and the sentencing. It's like, well, hang on. Here's a 10 minutes of clips of you guys just calling him the JP Morgan of crypto and praising him to high heaven. But it's just been getting worse. I mean, we always had some of that, but these reporters worship the central bankers, and so you're not getting objective journalism at all. I mean, we get too little of it in general, but in the financial media, it's just appalling with a few exceptions. I mean, there are the guys like the guy, I guess, what was the FT that did the Wirecard story and things like that. People like that. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the Leismans and the people listed in Bernanke's book of the trusted media that they could get their message out through. Well, that's called propaganda. So not getting news on the Fed for all these years, and that bugged me too. It's like, hey, you're not hearing the real news on the Fed. I'll tell you the real news on the Fed, but we need better.
Inflation is probably higher than we actually needed.
Well, it's funny because, I was talking earlier about how I was yelling at the TV when they would say 10 years ago, oh, there's no inflation, we need more inflation. I mean, that was a mantra. They said it every day. And in 2015, and I have a post out there on this showing, there was an article by Hilsenrath, and it was something like, oh, well, what's wrong with you Americans? Why are you so, kind of like now, why are you so down? Why aren't you? And the replies, I wrote them down because so much stuff gets deleted on the internet. And these are registered Wall Street Journal subscribers in 2015. And they are all saying, what, my cost of living's going through the roof. I'll send it out if anybody who's looking for it, or I'll put it on my Substack so people can find this stuff. But I mean, that's 2015 when the official CPI rate was, I think, 0.17%. Okay. And people are ranting about the cost of living. And so they have this CPI model that they use that I've described before. It's a joke because, first of all, the weightings are goofy. I think health insurance is rated the same as sporting goods. So health insurance is my number one expense. So then they do, as some have noted in the most recent CPI report that everyone thought was the greatest thing that ever hit America, they actually said that health insurance had gone down 34% over last year. Now, that's because they made some sort of weird one-time adjustment or something, but nobody other than the wackos like me questioned that. And, I've pointed out before that with hedonics, like for 25 years, they said car prices didn't go up. Okay. Because they said, well, you got a better stereo. So it's actually, what they do is something goes from $10 to $20. But what they do is they say, well, there were enhancements to this product that we think were worth $11. So actually the price didn't double. It went down, 10%, That's how they think. And we don't think like that. Normal people don't think like that. And the other thing that bugs me lately too is all these articles. Well, the economy is just killing it. It's the best economy ever. And why are people so bummed? I mean, I think like huge percentage of people think the economy is poor or fair at best. And I think it's because they underestimate the inflation. I mean, I said in one post, I think it was 2017, I said the big lie of this era is that there is no inflation. There was a hell of a lot of inflation. Harley Bassman talks about that. In 21 or something. He says, people that say there was no inflation, there's massive inflation. And I'm talking about things that people have to pay, but also people ignore the massive inflation in assets. I remember when in early 2020, probably February, like before the big panic, but the market was down like 14% or something. And Steve Leisman comes on and says, the Fed needs to do something. And I sent him a text and I was like, dude, if stocks are 14% cheaper than a week ago or than a month ago, isn't that good for young people who are starting in the workforce with a 401k buying stocks? So we pick winners and losers all the time. The Fed does. I don't, because I pick different winners and losers. And it's always the same winners that they pick. And it's basically the older people with assets. Anyway, I'm tired of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you brought up that word panic, right? We recently put a thread together kind of changing this verbiage that they use. Instead of using the word panic, they have changed it to depression, crash, financial crisis, black days, etc. So I think that's part of, changing, or let's say somebody's deliberate attempt to change that psychology around panics, right?
Oh, completely. We swim in a sea of propaganda every day. There was, as I put the post out today, until 1907, everything, including 1907, everything was a panic of this, panic of that. Then after that, well, we have a Great Depression, we have a .com bubble, we have a housing, we have great financial crisis. They don't call anything a panic anymore. We have crashes, we have things like that. So, but I think it's subtle. I think, because I thought, we went down more in 2008-09 than we did in 07, but they don't call it the panic of 08, Well, that's interesting, because is GFC sound better than panic? Maybe. I call it Great Depression too sometimes, because I think for half of America it was, and it still is. I think the bottom 50% own like 0.6% of all equities, and I think the top 1% own like 25%. I mean, I post these charts all the time. Again, just trying to educate, and started with 0 followers, and now I have 107,000. So I'm getting there, but I'm not, Janet Yellen or Jerome Powell. I don't have that kind of a bully pulpit.
Rudy, what does a 45-degree angle in finance mean?
Well, that was what Harry Markopolos said back when he was investigating Madoff, that a 45-degree angle in finance is fraud. So what he was saying is, that he looked at Madoff's returns, and they were just, I don't know if he was exaggerating slightly, but he was saying they were in a 45-degree angle. And he said, that's impossible over many years. You know what I mean? So, and I joked about that today and in the past, but I was referencing the fact that the S&P 1-minute chart today, like often, looked like a 45-degree angle, just bottom left, upper right. Although it looked like in the last few moments of the day, it a little, let me look here, it took a little dip, but I mean, it was pretty funny all day. It's just like lower left, upper right. And as, Mike Green always points out, a lot of this has to do with the passive flows coming in, and it's the most mindless algorithm in the world. Did you give me money, and how much? Okay, then I buy X amount of Amazon, X amount of Apple. And he's warning about that because, it could theoretically work in reverse too, I would imagine. Plus, it's completely distorting the market. I think he also pointed out the other day that the average stock is down something like a third this year or something. You'd have to listen to Mike and Jeff Snyder. They did a podcast, but it's a disconnect. And I think it's a disconnect in the society too. And I've used the analogy, it's not my unique analogy, but I use the analogy of the coyote, Wile E. Coyote. He's off the cliff and he doesn't realize it yet. I kind of feel that way about the economy. But I think a lot of people, they already fell off the cliff a long time ago. I mean, we're just talking about, like where I'm at, it's a nice area. Everything's still selling at top dollar houses and cash, and there's not much supply. And my thinking is that that's not going to, it's already changed for the bottom 80% or so, but for the maybe 90, but the top people, until the stock market breaks, you're not going to see, boats for sale and distressed selling, but you will see it, because I always like to say that, even in these best neighborhoods, there's a lot of people there that are like, one option grant away from losing their house or something, a lot of people, but that's going to have, they're going to be fine until the stock market starts to tank, and then they'll all scream for a bailout. We've already seen some of that from the CRE people, the Barry Sternlichs of the world, and, I need a bailout. There's a guy that's on the board of the New York Fed, and he's already came out saying we need to have some sort of TARP program for the CRE guys. And I'm like, no. Let's try capitalism this time. There's plenty of people out there that were responsible, that have saved some money up. And, if a lot of these guys, the reason they're so desperate when rates rose is because they leveraged up to the gills. If they had a little bit of surplus, they levered that up, and they're used to the leverage. And the leverage is always what kills you, whether you're an individual or a government. It's always the debt. So every time we get in these situations, these guys now, at least post, to 1998 with LTCM, they say, oh, we have to bail these guys out because they're so levered that if they collapse, asset prices are going to go down. And then everyone goes, oh, well, what do we do? Well, we just should bail them out then. It's ridiculous. Everyone's too big to fail now. It's hedge funds, I think that's what happened in 2020. A lot of what they did. The MBS, Randy Woodward was suggesting that they were saving somebody whose fund was blowing up. And so they bought a couple trillion more of MBS. And that's a crime that they have any MBS. They still own 2.4 trillion of mortgage-backed securities. They own 0 in 2008. We haven't normalized yet. We've just begun starting to normalize. Rates are normalized, I think, but certainly not the other policies. The QE, QT is a joke. I joke about that all the time. Look at QT. It's a joke. I think we're far more likely to have a balance sheet of 15 trillion than we are to have a balance sheet of, well, Bernanke said we should have under a trillion back in 2010. But even, let's say, they can't even get down to a few trillion. You know what I mean? So before they'll have to crank everything up again, in my opinion.
What role do you think there actually is for a central bank?
Well, lender of last resort, I think I think we should back, like in '08, even the smart people that I like say, oh, well, they had to do QE1. I'm like, okay. I think you need to backstop the depositors. I think you don't want bank runs, at least up to the 250K limit. Everybody else can get in line as a creditor as far as I'm concerned. But let's say push comes to shove, protect the depositors in banks. But everybody else get in line. We've proven over the last 15 years or whatever that money is no object when it comes to saving Wall Street. So like when Silicon Bank, I think it was, where the big thing was, well, we have to bail everybody out because some of these people have to meet payroll. Okay, fine. We could come up with a little program where we could tide them over payroll until, the smoke clears or something. But what instead we do is Yellen just did a blanket. I mean, all these guys, Ackman and all these guys, they all knew that 250K was the limit and they didn't care, probably because they figured they'd get bailed out, which they did. So, they were involved in all sorts of monkey business, I think. And there was no, obviously the oversight and the planning wasn't good there. But I guess the biggest fault they did was they believed the Fed when they said they weren't going to raise rates. But
I was just going to say, it's not necessarily as cut and dry as not seeing any intervention in the monetary base or interest rates or stimulus or tightening of financial conditions as being detrimental to the free markets and a net negative.
Well, I think it is. But I mean, we left, that train left the station, 100 years ago. I mean, I think they should backstop the deposits. I really think that, like, if it's a hedge funds and things like that, thinking was, I think in March 2020, we have to bail out these hedge funds so that they don't have a disorderly liquidation. And that would make asset prices go down. But so what? I mean, that would have been you would have people swoop in and buy these assets. As Woodward says, when they were buying MBS hand over fist, he said his clients were buying MBS. They would have bought those MBS. Other people would have bought those MBS. But he thinks a hedge fund, I got the video. He thinks a hedge fund was blowing up somewhere in Europe. And by the way, a lot of what we do, a lot of the intervention the Fed does has nothing to do with Americans here. They're bailing out foreigners. And now some people may argue, well, that's, it's good for the Americans, but I don't know. I mean, I don't think the fact of the matter is that the vast, vast majority of the assets are owned by a very small number of people, particularly the stock market. And they keep bailing out the stock market for the last 20 years. I mean, that was like priority number one. So you got the canyon effect. The rich have been getting richer. And when you have rates, here's a great point in Edward Chancellor's book. If you have rates at zero, the only people that have the collateral to borrow a ton of money are rich people at these low rates. I mean, credit card rates were 20% or whatever, 18% back when rates were zero. So it's not like, the average person is getting 0% or rate. Now, on housing and maybe auto loans, for a period they were. But my argument with that is that, okay, but they got a lower rate, but the prices went ballistic. So you're robbing Peter to pay Paul in a way. So I think they just need to get out of the saving everybody that they hope to work for later. It's like I said something like the Fed put is whatever level where the future jobs of these ex-FOMC members, when those start to dry up, that's the put. Point this out for you. Look at the number of Federal Reserve officials that go to work at all the people that they're bailing out. I mean, look at Citadel. That's just such an egregious example for Bernanke to go to Citadel and PIMCO. And by the way, everybody at the Fed spends some time at PIMCO at some point or another. I mean, to me, it's just delayed bribery, or it's a reward, or it's a revolving door system. And we have it with the regulators too. I mean, people forget the Federal Reserve is a regulator. It is the top big bank regulator. And they've largely done an abysmal job. Why does Mary Daly still have her job, right? So again, no accountability. I think at this point, the Fed, I say and the Fed, I like to joke about that, but at least put it on a leash. The big problem is the only ones who can really put the Fed on the leash is Congress. And Congress is completely AWOL. They've abdicated entirely years ago. And they love the money printing. I mean, Trump loved the money printing. Trump called for negative rates. Trump called for QE. So it's both parties. They love this free money because it absolves them of any sort of fiscal responsibility. And they're still spending, Yellen and Biden are still spending like there's no tomorrow. And, there's no amount we can't pay for Ukraine or whatever pet project, something with ESG slapped on it. I don't want to be a downer, but this needs to change. I mean, we're on an unsustainable path. Is it Stein's law that says, if something can't keep going forever, it'll stop? Well, someday this will stop. And I think everyone is hoping that it's, in 50 years after they're gone and they'll let the grandkids deal with it. I don't think like that. I think that's nonsense. And I think that this generation is ridiculously selfish in not dealing with problems and kicking the can down the road. And the Fed's the main way that they've done that in this century.
Rudy, do you think we're starting to see some deflation? And why is that something that the Fed is ultimately the most afraid of?
Yeah, well, we're certainly starting to see articles and comments, people warning us about the massive deflation coming. Deflation, one time I said, I think was an untaxed increase in your purchasing power, and they can't have that. Deflation, yeah, it's the thing that no one normal ever worries about. I think I posted the other day, since we went off gold in 33 for Americans, and certainly since 1968 or 71, whenever we went off hard money entirely and defaulted on the world, there's no deflation. Bernanke, one of the biggest villains, he in 2002, he has a speech at the Federal Reserve. He says, we have a technology called a printing press that is able to produce as many dollars as we want at essentially no cost. So what do you think they're going to do if PIMCO's gets threatened, or something? They're going to print like crazy. And as Joseph Wang pointed out the other day, I think that Powell, when push comes to shove, he'll run to the model people, as they call them, and they'll tell him to print. And all QE is Steve Eisman. It's monetary policy for rich people. And Druckenmiller said the greatest factor in increasing wealth inequality is QE. There's no debate about it. That's Druckenmiller. So between Druckenmiller and Eisman, and between Noah Smith and Janet Yellen, who are you going to believe? In Chris Leonard's great book, Lords of Easy Money, another Fed official, whose name I forget, said that Janet Yellen was the biggest proponent for QE. And what QE does is it drives up the price of assets. So if you own assets, especially levered assets, you're going to do pretty good. And if you don't, you're not. So all these people that got 2.75% rates on their homes and then paid, 5 times what the home was 10 years ago, did they really get a good deal? I don't know, because property taxes are going to be based on that higher rate. The roof cost is now going to be so much higher. That's why a lot of people who bought houses and have 2.75% rates, it seems like they're running into financial trouble because their expenses are going up. It's, a house in many ways is a money pit. And they're realizing that it costs thousands and thousands of dollars to fix things, if not more. So maybe it would have been better if they hadn't bid that house up, by $100,000, like, when 50 people are bidding on a house back in 2021 or something. There's two sides of looking at everything. What does Munger say? Invert, always invert. And people are underwater on their cars. I think the car loans now are more than the student loans, aren't they? Something like that, yeah. And so there's going to be a lot of cars being handed back, I think, at some point, or repossessed. But they'll probably come out with a government program that says, okay, anyone with a car, you get a forbearance for, who knows? I said one time, don't underestimate how insane these guys will get to protect the status quo. So I wish I would have known that better 20 years ago. But I am amazed. I've done things I never thought they would do. And I don't think they ever thought they would do. And I've said before, the founders of the Fed would be appalled by what's become. The founders of the Fed were actually still hard money guys. Remember, we're still on a gold standard back in 1913. So they would look at these guys as a freak show, which it is. And unfortunately, the people that suffer are the bottom 90%. So, and even the top. No, but I was just going to say, even all the gains really have gone to the top 1%, especially the top 0.1%. Even the next 9% of the top 10 have actually lost ground against the top 1%. So like Randy Waldman says, the billionaires make human shields of the merely affluent. I always love that quote.
That's a stunning but very accurate quote.
Yeah.
I was just going to bring up the idea that you brought up a little bit earlier, the idea of when the leverage starts to kill you, right? Yeah. 2 weeks ago, we saw a disastrous bond auction, and part of it was blamed on a ransomware attack of China's biggest bank. So do you think this is a theme of more to come?
You mean a theme of making up stories, trying to describe things they don't want to talk about? I don't know. I don't know what happened at ICBC. I remember September of 2019 when the repo market kind of froze up and rates went to 9%. And I still have an article from Reuters that explains back then, the reason for this was the companies were withdrawing money from their accounts to pay their quarterly tax bills or something. It was just absurd. But so something like the auction was bad because, this hack, which may be true, but the fact is they've lied so often and so long that it's really hard to tell with, So I think there's a whole cottage industry of the whole division at the Fed that just works on, narrative shaping. As Mike Taylor said that Janet said that people read the minutes and think they're the actual minutes. And he's got a great quote. He says, no, it's all scripted and it's a policy tool. And, who is it? Is it Keith McCullough says, the purpose of the Fed is to make the U.S. Treasury look solvent, something like that. So it's all propaganda. We're swimming in propaganda. I see it all the time. It's very subtle. Americans they think they're getting the news when really they're getting largely a lot of propaganda. And they don't realize it. They think, propaganda is something that happens in China or Russia. But I don't think anybody's perfected it like the Americans have. We're good at it. We've been working at it for a long time. And it's working. It often works.
I think the perfect proof of that is the fact that many Americans consider the Eastern Bloc countries, let's say, to have far more propaganda, far more active propaganda campaigns than we do here.
Yeah. But it's like the Russians, I think they knew that propaganda was propaganda. I don't think people know that the New York Times is propaganda. Most people, so.
Brought up the idea of really having some type of a fiscal and monetary restraint for central bankers. Is gold a great form of that, creating this ballast and restraint on the central banks? And is it possible, or do we need to return to that?
Well, I look at a lot of charts over the years, and there are so many charts that go off the rails after the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. And I don't think it's coincidental. I think that this is interesting that there is no currency on earth now. Well, I don't know about El Salvador. I'm ignorant on that, but there is no currency on earth now that is backed by anything other than what Jim Grant would call the PhD standard. So in 71 or 68 or wherever you want to measure it, all brakes on money printing were removed. And, this is the Kashkari quote that I love to play where Scott Pelley is saying, you printing money without, is that what you've been doing? And Kashkari's proudly like, yeah. And Pelley goes, there's no limit to your ability to do that. He's like, there's no limit to our ability to do that. We can print and print. And that's why when I laugh about deflation, because there's all these articles now about deflation, but it's nonsense. There's a little chart I drew just myself where you have this line that kind of goes lower left to upper right, like massively, and then has like a tiny little drop, and then that deflation. That's the deflation right there. So people live on price levels, not rate of change, right? That's one thing these goofballs in the media don't understand, and the goofballs at the Fed don't understand. They live on price levels. Gold, can we bring it back? Maybe that ship has sailed. I can't imagine. Maybe, okay. Every country in the world has the same problem we do. And I don't think we're the first that's going to collapse. America has a lot of assets and a lot of good advantages that other countries don't have. And I'm not down on America at all. I love America, which is why I'm so angry at the knuckleheads that have been running the country for the last 20, 30 years. And gold, I don't know. I've called gold a handgun you keep in the drawer and hope you never need. For me, I view it more as an insurance type thing. It's like having a gun in the drawer. I trade the miners, but once in a while, and with actually made some money over the years with them, but you got to know when to sell them. You definitely date them. You don't marry the miners. But I don't know how it would work. There would have to be some sort of international agreement where they back, some new currency. I don't want a one world currency. We actually own a lot of gold. I think a gold standard would only work if they repriced gold dramatically. People calculate all sorts of different numbers, whether it's, 15,000 or 100,000 or something. But, at the right price, you could have a gold standard right now, but not at 2,000 an ounce. And there's inflation with the gold standard. I think is there 2% or something production increase every year or something historically. So, well, maybe that dies down and maybe a meteor lands one day and we have a big supply and would that be deflation or inflation? So it's like when they say end the Fed, I just want to put it on a leash. Gold standard. Yeah, at the right price, you could probably do it. Mm-hmm. Now, I wonder who's buying gold more than anybody. It's Indians, Russians, Chinese, basically, 10 times the population of the United States. Those people are buying gold. Why? Why is China buying gold? Is it tradition? As Ben Bernanke would smugly say. Do they have a plan? I mean, if China came out with a gold-backed yuan where you could actually exchange the yuan for gold, I mean, that's tempting, assuming you thought that transaction would be, as an American, you would be allowed to do that. And Russia certainly has a lot, and India has a lot. Now, they have cultural reasons for that too, but why are the central banks buying gold hand over fist? And frankly, gold is at all-time highs in most currencies right now, right? So a lot of people in other countries have been saved by gold because they didn't hold the local currency. People in Argentina, maybe, which has been in the news lately. Right. Saw the headline, the FT today, and it was something like, that new president they elected, who I don't know that much about, but he said, he's going to bring instability to Argentina. And I just laughed. It's like, oh yeah, Argentina's had such stability. Here's a currency chart of Argentina the last 5 years. So propaganda. FT is really bad. It's like The Economist. It's so bad. But comments, as I say, are always better than the article. If you go, sometimes the readers of the FT are pretty savvy people, and they read that and they go, the author is nuts, So I like to see that. That makes me feel better to know that I'm not the only one that sees this nonsense. I mean, you see it and other people see it. That's good to know. Now, all we got to do is get in power, Well,
yeah, well, I imagine that our incentives and our ideas are probably very unpalatable to most people, considering that, we try to understand how we got here, and the actual route out is going to be more pain. I don't think anybody is going to win against somebody that is just promising more free shit.
That's true. Most people do.
That just kicks the can down the road further.
Yeah. No, most Americans clearly have chosen themselves over their kids or their grandkids. Clearly. So, yeah, it's sad.
Rudy, you mentioned owning some of the gold miners, and obviously, this isn't financial advice, but are there certain times that you feel that people should own gold miners or start looking at them more seriously? And do you have a sense why you think there's such a dislocation right now between the valuation of a lot of gold miners and the gold price itself?
Well, I'm certainly no gold mining stock expert. I have a couple that I've traded over the years, and so I'm happy with them. I think they're not going to go out of business, and they're very volatile, which I like. My general view is what's really as an investment view is what's really hated at the moment. What's really hated right now today? What does no one want to own? And then that's the kind of thing I'm looking at. So that tells you how strange I am. But so I'll buy.
That runway, unfortunately, is pretty long for a lot of this stuff.
Oh yeah. It's long, and of course you're always early. I'm always early / wrong, But that's okay. As I mentioned in another podcast, I said, I break really cardinal rules of investing. Like I'll start getting into a stock that I'm interested in, say a gold miner, and I'll buy it, and then it'll go lower, and then I'll buy some more, and then it'll go lower, and I'll buy some more. And but I'm fine with that because I don't have clients calling me going, what are you insane? And then I've had times where but I believed in this, I believed in it, and I believed that my time was going to come where I was averaging down, and it got to a point where it's like, oh man, this, where anybody with a half a brain would have said, oh, cut your loss and run. And sure enough, because the way the miners trade, they hate it. And then boom, they go up like a flagpole. And so that's what it did. And then I sold, and then it goes higher, but in the end, make a bunch of money. But you can't do that if you're a day trader. And I'm not. I'll trade for months or years. And you can't do it if you have clients, because they'll call you and they'll say, what the hell are you doing? Why are you buying this crappy stock? And once in a blue moon, you realize it is a crappy stock, and you get out. But no, I've had some real home runs that way. It's because I didn't need to make a quarter. I didn't need to, have a great quarter. I could have a terrible quarter, and then because I figured, what, in the next 1 or 2 quarters, I'm going to have a great quarter, and I did, and it worked out. But that's just because I'm familiar with just a couple stocks. The industry as a whole, I don't know. It's like Mark Twain said, it's a hole in the ground with a liar at the top, right? So. Yeah. You're up in Canada, so you're probably familiar with this more than me. But that's I have stuff that I've owned forever, and that's kind of like my core stuff that I've literally owned for decades. And then I've got the stuff I trade around, and the miners are one of those. I don't really have a core like mining stock position. I'm not crazy about the GDX or GDXJ. I might do that for a trade once in a blue moon, but I'm not really a trader. I'm more like certainly not a day or week trader, longer period. And frankly, I think back now, there's probably, 1 or 2 days a year, maybe, where stocks are dumping and everyone hates them and everyone wishes they weren't owned stocks. And if you really just nibbled or started getting in on those couple days, instead of buying like 20 times during the year, if you just waited for those few days, you could have tremendous returns, I think. Whereas picking when to sell is harder than picking when to buy, I think. I think bottoms are easier to find than tops. But yeah, I mean, take a flyer, but all this money on the gold miner should be stuff that it shouldn't be your rent money or your kids' shoes money.
Well, we were kind of discussing before we hit record today about owning Bitcoin or Amazon stock, for example. And, trying to pick top or when to sell on either of those, if you would have held them for 5+ years, would be absolutely one of the most difficult things to be able to do, I think.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. That's what I was mentioning. Like I could have, Amazon back in the day had a number of 95% price collapses, in the early, I don't know, I'm thinking maybe early 90s or something. I have to look at a chart. And you would have had to hold on during, like the late 90s, I guess. Or maybe, I don't know when they went public. But, and then now, like I said, they're a huge winner. You're up, this a couple hundred times. But for every Amazon, there's 1,000 stocks that went away over the last 30 years. People forget that. The survivor bias is incredible. And the only people that bought Amazon at $2 and still hold it are, by and large, I think, other than a few geniuses, people who, like I was telling you, went into, bought some Amazon in 2000 and went into a coma for the next 20 years. As for Bitcoin, you and I both could have bought that all day long. I made the mistake, apparently. I mean, I'm not a trader, so I clearly could have traded it over the years, but I made the mistake of believing that if it ever got big enough, the government would crush it. I mean, we've gone to war over less than a threat than Bitcoin. And I still think that may happen. And people say, they can't do that. Well, I think they can. I think they could just make it so egregiously painful for you if you're caught. Look, we had gold and silver listed in the Constitution as money, okay? In the Constitution. And in 1933, FDR confiscated it. Mm-hmm. You had to hand it in or you had a $10,000 fine. And I forget the jail term, 3 years or something. It was very severe. I mean, $10,000 in 1933 was a lot of money. I like to joke like the other day, I was like, $3 trillion used to be a lot of money. The numbers we talk about now are just beyond human comprehension. And people throw them out like it's nothing, we're selling $1 trillion in bonds this quarter or something. It's like, oh, okay. It's like a jury that has no concept of the difference between $10,000 and $1 billion. And then when they award, they'll award somebody, we award you $50 billion, to a lot of people, 50 billion might as well be 500 or 5,000. But when we start throwing trillions around, and of course, Japan's on quadrillions, but their currency's pennies, but it's just absurd. And people think like, we've just got infinite money. And you have people like Kashkari saying, yeah, we have infinite money. And Bernanke, Nobel Prize winner, infinite money. So infinite money, like I said, someday everyone's going to be a billionaire. We'll all be billionaires. Hopefully not in my lifetime.
Just like in Zimbabwe.
Yeah. I got a great picture of two guys holding up a sign as, starving billionaires. Yeah, it's everybody just thinks that money is free and we can pay for everything and we don't have to tax. And we don't have to cut anybody's benefits or, because my entitlement is your welfare, Dalio, I make fun of a lot. He made a great point. He says, you own bonds, but they've got too many bonds. So they could either pay you less, an overt default, or they can pay you off in full, but your bonds will buy half as much as they used to because they've inflated the currency. It's still a default. Inflation is a default, absolutely. And it's a tax too, as another way to look at it, as Ben Bernanke even said back in 2010 or so, 12. It's a tax. But the government, like you said, you get elected if you do a covert default as opposed to an overt default. So I think they really do at heart, they really want inflation. I mean, they're struggling so hard after almost 3 years now to get back down to their 2% target. Well, the 2% target's nonsense. They made that up. Their official legislative target is stable prices, which does not mean going up at 2% a year. It doesn't mean going up at 4% a year either, or 3.2. Plus, again, I make the mistake. I do this. I'm talking about CPI as if it's a real thing. It's not. There's a CPI and cost of living, two totally different things. The end.
Just because of all of the adjustments and
substitution, weightings, hedonics, seasonal adjustments. As Grant Williams says, they've made countless adjustments to the CPI. Every single one of them has lowered the CPI. So you can understand what the adjustments are for. They're to lower the CPI. Because the CPI, Social Security and other things, it really affects the government's budget. So they have a huge incentive, again, Munger, to downplay CPI. Mm-hmm. And speaking of downplay, what bugs me is you got guys like Krugman and Justin Wolfers and that crowd that are always, and Joe Wiesenthal 100 years ago, before I blocked him, would be like, what's the big deal with this inflation? Why does everybody, they talk like, Kashkari used to do this all the time. What are you, some kind of idiot talking about the cost of living, Well, I always tell these people, let's go argue in a supermarket. And I will, believe me, you better bring security because these guys are so out of touch. And I remember years ago, was it at least, God, I don't know how many years, 10 years ago or something, Bill Dudley's in New York with a Fed Listens tour, and they're all complaining about the cost of living. And he says, hey, but your iPhone is faster or something, and our iPad. And, let them eat iPads was the joke, but people were angry. And this was when the official inflation rate was, 1% or something. So I think the reason that people are upset is because the economic narrative we get from the government doesn't match what they see in their daily lives.
If they have the luxury of being able to even pay attention to it to begin with.
Correct. Like I said, I don't mind if someone asks me a question, they say, oh, this might be a dumb question. I'm like, no, most people don't know this stuff because they're too busy trying to struggle to survive, feed their family or go to work or help others. But yeah, it's a problem. And they benefit. Of course, the last thing that the guys in charge want is financial education. They don't want people knowing what they're doing. They don't want people like me telling people how the CPI is constructed. They don't want people doubt. Well, the thing is, they don't need me. People already know. When they hear CPI is 3%, I've told people that don't pay any attention to me, hey, is your CPI is 3%? They're like, oh, yeah, right. They're like, laugh. Yeah, it's more like 20%, because they go shopping and they see prices all the time. Prices are ridiculous. And I think I just try and speak up for those people because they get no voice on CNBC. They get no voice in the financial media. They get no voice in Congress. And I'm encouraged to see more people. I've noticed it over recent years, especially people are waking up. A lot of the Bitcoin people I have common ground with because they understand the scam. And they're coming at it from a different approach than me, but that's fine. Common ground, I'm all about. I'd much rather find common ground with people than argue with them about the stuff we disagree on. Let's agree to what we agree on and fight for that. And I think a lot of young people are realizing how bad the Fed is. And that's very different from when I got on here in 2013. And I think I was just who's this nut criticizing the Fed? The Fed is like the fourth branch of government. It's like God came down from heaven and gave us the Fed. The Fed's the greatest thing in the world. There's a lot of people like, it's just a fantasy, but it's all the people that benefit from the Fed, basically, I'll see Ken, what's his name, Griffin on CNBC. Yeah, I think the Fed's doing a good job. This is years ago before they raised rates. And I'm like laughing. I'm like, yeah, okay. Ken Griffin thinks the Fed's doing a good job, or David Rubenstein thinks the Fed's doing a good job. He started the Carlyle Group, which is where Powell came from, and Quarles.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rudy, you're talking about those that are in charge. And obviously, without asking you to make a prediction, as I know that's extremely difficult, but we're just under a year away now to go until the 2024 presidential election. So what do you see as the road ahead here for the next year?
Yeah, I plan to check out. I plan to stay away from it as much as possible. I have no candidate. Like I said, I think Biden is a much worse president than I expected him to be. I think he's surrounded himself with horrible people. I don't think he's running the country. I think it's probably the Obamas. Just basically, in many ways, a train wreck. But then again, I think back, I was going off on Trump all the time. Like I said, he's calling for negative rates in QE, and he was bashing the Fed for being not loose enough, So I don't have a candidate. I kind of liked Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for a bit, at least as far as my pinned tweet, but he appears to be against the banksters and against the wars. And he certainly knows that his father and his uncle were murdered, and not by the people they were supposedly murdered by. But I admire that. And he's got a great podcast, by the way. I listened to that for years before he even started running. He gets good guests and he has good discussions. I don't have a candidate. I'll probably write in, Jim Grant, like I joke, or Ron Paul again or something. Because I don't know what to do. I tell people vote and then they laugh at me and probably forget, maybe I'm just naive, I probably am. But I don't know. We got to get new people in there, and people have to demand it. Don't vote for the same idiots. Everyone's congressman can't be great. Okay. So look up how they voted on certain things, or for nobody, none of them. Back in 2020, the Federal Reserve came out with a new policy direction where they were explicitly going to have inflation above 2%. And in other words, they wanted more inflation. I mean, I think that was unprecedented in the history of the Federal Reserve, where they were like really, well, maybe not unprecedented, but very unusual to say we want higher than 2% inflation, because they came up with this ridiculous average inflation targeting thing, which is to a normal person totally insane. But to them, it makes sense because they're lost in their math models. Not a single person in Congress objected to it that I'm aware of. And frankly, almost no one on FinTwit objected to it besides me and a few others, maybe. And it ended up massively hurting hundreds of millions of Americans because they got their wish, whether it was the fiscal and combined with their idiotic monetary policy or not. But and people are paying for it. And you wonder why the moods of the country is bad. Well, it was bad before. Jack up everyone's cost of living and see how bad it gets. So nobody in Congress cared. So just don't vote for any incumbent. Vote against every incumbent. Vote for the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or the Peace and Freedom Party or something. But don't vote, or vote for the Democrat or Republican. But don't vote for the incumbent, because they're almost all bad. There's probably on one hand I can count a few congressmen that I think are worth a damn. And as Chris Whalen says, he can count on one hand the number of Congress that can talk intelligently about monetary policy. And I think his quote is, the rest of them forget about it. So that's sad, because I watch these hearings on C-SPAN when the senator or House is interviewing, or questioning Yellen or Powell. And I am just floored by the vapidity and the ignorance of these Congress people about monetary policy. And I'm appalled at how often, at least maybe until recently, how deferential these Congress people are to these guys. Like, they think that they're beneath the Federal Reserve, these congressmen. They're like, oh, thank you, Mr. Powell, for your service. And thank you for answering my questions today. It's like, dude, you're a congressman. You are the branch of government in charge of this organization that you created in 1913. You could put them on a leash anytime you want to. But like I said, somebody, they don't even know that they're in charge of the Fed. It's like I said, they think it's some coven of witches that lives in the sky. They think that these are high priests. And watch one of these C-SPAN hearings where, especially the House or the Senate is questioning Powell or Yellen. Now, they may be angrier now because the rates are higher, and they want easy money. They want super easy money because then they can fund whatever their little pet boondoggle is. But they're just kissing Powell's butt, And I make comments about it. People laugh, but nothing changes. So,
well, as we're talking about those that we think we vote for, how about this class or this organization that I think has kind of flown back under the radar? And it's one that nobody's actually voting for. The WEF has kind of, I don't know if it's lost steam or support, but we hear much less about it than the last 12 to 18 months. So do you think they're still lurking in the shadows? Or are they, creeping ever closer to implementing their own nothing and be happy narrative?
I was learning about basal cell cancer. And I guess there's a type of basal cell cancer that kind of spreads like roots, like deep. And that's how I view the WEF. They're just a little bump on the surface, but their roots are entwined everywhere. I mean, Gavin Newsom, WEF, Andrew Sorkin, WEF, certainly half the cabinet of Trudeau, WEF. I'm sure half the EU, WEF. They're all like future global leaders or whatever. They've gone through the camps and the indoctrinations, and they're fully on board, I think, with a globalist agenda. And I think they want to have Elysium or Snowpiercer for them and fly in their private jets. And I think they just want to keep people in 15-minute prison cities. And I do. I mean, it starts to sound crazy, but the WEF, which has blocked me, by the way, thank you very much. It's like a collection of the world's worst people all showing up there in Davos. I've been making fun of that for 10 years. And it's only in recent years that people have discovered the WEF. I mean, it's exactly the type of crowd that Jeff Epstein hung out with. And I certainly agree. I think that Klaus Schwab, talking to David Gergen, who's a character, believe me, involved deep in this stuff, telling Gergen, yeah, we penetrate the cabinets. We have people, half the cabinet of Trudeau is WEF members. And I mean, look,
I remember that particular clip.
Yeah. And anybody, doesn't believe me, I'll send me and I'll retweet or whatever. But look at the leadership. Who's on the board of trustees? This is just a sample that Americans would know. There's more than this. Mark Benioff, Larry Fink, Chrystia Freeland, a little fascist up in Canada, head of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, who I believe wasn't she accused of altering IMF data to suit the Chinese or something like that. Al Gore is on the WEF board. Christine Lagarde, it's like Klaus Schwab, David Rubenstein, okay, the Carlyle Group guy, and Powell's old boss. These people are all on the WEF Board of Trustees. So they are embedded in society all around the world among our quote unquote leaders. And it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a fact. I'm going to just go to the WEF governance page. And they talk very clearly about, like, you will have no privacy. I mean, I saw an interview with Klaus Schwab the other day saying, you have to give up your privacy. We have total transparency. We know everything about you and your life, and to get on the internet or anything like that. And very scary to, it should be very scary to Americans. I don't know, most Americans don't have to learn about this stuff. But I completely agree that WEF is a very bad organization with bad people doing bad things. And I don't care. They invite Oxfam there or something, so they can speak truth to power or something. But I think they just want to get free plane flights and party with these guys. Yeah, it's a problem. I mean, and there's other groups, I think, besides the WEF. Jeff Epstein was a member of the Council for Relations and the Trilateral Commission and things like that. And these guys are all in the same things. It's all, it's a club. It's an old boys and girls club. And I don't think they want a world government. I think they want statism. I think they want totalitarianism. And I think they want to be free to have their Elysium and their private jets. So, are they my number one target? No, but they're certainly a target.
Absolutely. Well, Rudy, I appreciate you spending the time with me today to have this wide-ranging conversation on the anniversary of your death, as it were.
Yeah.
Is there anything?
Feel good.
You mentioned that you're hopeful. What is giving you hope right now?
The young people that I see that don't make it on TV, a lot of brilliant, talented, smart, principled young people that I personally know of. And again, these people, they're not, you don't see them on social media or on the nightly news. So we need to get rid of this current crop of ne'er-do-wells that's been in charge for so long. I mean, look at all these people. McConnell's been around since mid-'80s, Pelosi mid-'80s, Joe Biden. You can't get any more status quo than him. He's been around forever. Trump is, I don't know, what's he pushing? 80, 78, something like that. All these people just now, like I said before, you can't.
It was Biden's 81st birthday today, if I'm not mistaken. I was
he's
to a podcast today about.
He's an old 81 too. I mean, I know a guy that's 81 that I see pretty regularly, and he looks 60, but Biden looks 100. Mm-hmm. So, like I said, I don't think Biden's running the show. But I mean, you have to get people with good ideas. You can't just say we need younger people, because there are plenty of younger people out there with terrible ideas. So we don't want to replace, Biden with a Kamala or a I don't know, some other Gavin Newsom. I don't know. I think Gavin Newsom, I call him like the Patrick Bateman of politics. I don't trust that. I mean, I had to live through him during COVID, and he was one of the most oppressive, dictatorial, arbitrary, he went out of his way to make life miserable for people here, I think. And he ignored all of his own rules. He's a hypocrite of the highest order, as many of them are. And so he's one particular that he's running for president, and I'm looking forward to many, many memes to come about that guy. But but anyway, I'm optimistic because, we still live in a First Amendment, still basically applies in the United States, which I'm very thankful for. I mean, it doesn't apply in England, it doesn't apply in Europe. So I'm thankful for that. Thankful for, of course, family and everything that I don't talk about. I think the United States has a lot of advantages. I think our demographics are going to be better. I'm glad we live next door to Mexico and not some other countries. I think that we got a lot of great advantages. And we lost our way with the idea that the most important thing in the world is money and the stock market. I think we need to get away from that and think more holistic about what's good for this country and society. The wealth inequality is not good for society, because you have a bunch of very, very poor people and you have a small number of unimaginably wealthy people. And that's not good. It's not good. And all we've done in the last century is exacerbate that dramatically largely through monetary policy. I mean, read Edward Chancellor's book, The Price of Time. He explains very well how it works. People with first access to the money, the Steve Schwartzmans and the Larry Finks and all, they're going to buy up the assets, and the assets are going to appreciate, and they're going to lever up. And the guy working a regular job who, can't come up with $400 in an emergency, he just falls behind as the inflation that they called for, hits him really hard. Mm-hmm. But how we throw out that way of thinking from our leaders, I don't know. New leaders, maybe, or people, there's a lot of the Bitcoin people that have good ideas, and I don't know, I'm not a That's a whole nother podcast. But I wish them well. And again, common ground, find common ground. Liberals and conservatives should agree on certain things. I think I'm always shocked that the liberals tend to be very pro-Fed, like they think it's some sort of Santa Claus or something. The conservatives, the Larry Kudlows of the world, and conservative and liberal, the words don't even mean anything anymore. But someone like Larry Kudlow loves the Fed because they print money and he gets rich and we can bomb countries without raising taxes forever and borrow. But the liberals think, I don't know what they think. They think, oh, Janet Yellen cares about poor Hispanic people. Well, that's bull. I don't think she knows any poor Hispanic people. She cares about her next speaking engagement at Citadel. But no, if she cared, she wouldn't have been the primary advocate for QE. And she wouldn't have been saying that her only regret at the Fed was low inflation. Low inflation kills, especially poor people. Paul Krugman's like, do we have any evidence that inflation hurts poor people? I mean, that's an actual quote from that guy. And he's published in the New York Times. So we got to change that. We got to change our quarters. We got to change our politicians. We got to change our bureaucrats. We got to get in people that don't think like these people think. So how we do that, I don't know. I'm not a political strategist, but you can't keep voting for the same thing and expect different results.
Absolutely. Rudy, thanks so much for your time today. If anybody wants to get more from you, all of your Twitter threads, hopefully they stay up there for
till I get banned again.
Again, at Rudy Havenstein, and of course your Substack, which is more of a collection and longer form pieces of all of that.
It's different. Yeah, rudy.substack.com. And it was great talking with you. I can talk about other things too sometime. Maybe we'll come on and talk about football or music or something. I'd love to do a music podcast. Maybe I wants to do that. So, but yeah, I enjoyed it. I always end up feeling like I've just gone in this hour rant against the Fed. And I guess I did, but I think it's important. And I think they've done a lot of damage to this country. And I think we need to learn about it and be aware about it and be aware of it and fight it. Mm-hmm. So thank you for your time.
And I think you have a humorous way of helping people understand what the point of the education that we need around this stuff is.
I hope so. And, I almost always provide links and pictures and everything. I'm not just making this stuff up. So other than when I'm doing jokes, I tell people, please don't fact check my jokes. But no, I've always had links. Of course, the problem on the internet is, any link more than 30 seconds old generally gets deleted, or it gets paywalled or something. So it's really hard. I'm worried we've lost so much history, digital history. There's so many videos and things from like the .com era that are just gone. You can't find old videos usually. Sometimes old text archive.org works, but we're losing a ton of digital history. And I think the guys in charge want that because as you can see from the stuff I post, they say a lot of stupid things over the years. And I think they'd rather that all that stuff was kind of wiped away.
Yeah, absolutely. Rudy, thanks so much.
All right. Have a good one.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.